All right, good afternoon. I always wait to make sure it is in fact afternoon with seconds past midday. My name is Nadeau. I'm a professor and chair of public health here at UC Irvine. And I host this seminar series, although anybody from the public health program can invite speakers, and we open it up to the community to make sure that we learn from our colleagues and friends out in the community as much as from the experts that come to share their wisdom and knowledge with us. We also thank the Office of Extension for recording this series, and they are made available through the OpenCourseware website of the university. We have been doing this for 5 years, and it's a great opportunity to extend the reach of the educational program at Public Health Irvine. It is thanks to the network of our faculty, students, colleagues that we are lucky to have experts on various topics in public health come to UCI to talk to us. And today's speaker, Dr. Nadeau, we actually honored him along with the diabetes clinic at Hoag Hospital last spring quarter, because for many years they have been mentoring our students in their practicum projects, and it's been a rewarding collaboration all around. I hope today's presentation will further solidify that relationship. If you'd like to know more about diabetes or Hoag operations in our county, I'm sure he'll be delighted to share with you at lunch, which we host right after the presentation at the Anteater Instructional Research Building, just about 3 minutes walk from here. Dr. Nadeau is a board-certified endocrinologist. He serves as the director of the Mary and Dick Allen Diabetes Center in Newport Beach. He also holds, I believe, the inaugural brand new endowed position named for Dr. Chris Ayer, who's also on our external board of visitors. Dr. Nadeau received his medical degree from Tufts University School of Medicine, and then he earned a master's in nutrition also from Tufts. He's won several awards, including National Research Service Awards, and wrote a book that's been very well received, and it is the title of this presentation that we have today. The book is co-authored with Dr. James Joseph, also of Tufts, and Anne Underwood of Newsweek magazine. Today we will hear about the book, about the wisdom embedded in it. Please join me to welcome Dr. Nadeau to UCI.
Oh, great. Thank you so much. Well, thank you so much for that very kind introduction, and it's really a true honor to be here today and to talk to you a bit about color and food and overall health. Yeah, it's great to be here. So I think I'd like to start off with a concept that ideas can change civilization. And when it comes to color and food, I think color is an exciting thing. It's something that kids can get into. They can think about red foods and blue foods and green foods. And if they realize just how healthful those can be for them, I think we can kind of bring them around to eating more fruits and vegetables, which would do a lot for the health of the civilization overall. So this is from Hippocrates, 5th century BC. Let food be your medicine, and your medicine be your food. And I think we really need to take this home, because it turns out that these brightly colored fruits and vegetables have within them elements that can really protect us. The way I think about it, as we'll talk about, is that plants are living in a sea of ultraviolet radiation that would kill us all, and they use these pigments to protect themselves. And when we eat these brightly colored fruits and vegetables, we have conveyed to us the protective benefit that is very anti-inflammatory and also antioxidant, protect us from the aging process and a wide variety of different diseases. So in terms of diets overall, I think traditional diets are really the most powerful. Certainly one famous person in the public health world is Ansel Keys, who did the 7-country study and found very low rates of heart disease in people who were living in the Mediterranean on Crete. And he, through his life, promoted reasonably low-fat diets and really was against using the body as a garbage can, as we'll talk about. So the Mediterranean diet really was where Western civilization was born: Egypt, Greece, Rome. And the diet really includes a lot of vegetables, a lot of whole grains, fruits, and being active as well, eating some fish, nuts as a protein source potentially, and a little vino as well. Whereas if we contrast this to today, if we look at the epidemic of diabetes and obesity, it correlates well with the density of McDonald's restaurants. So the more McDonald's, the more obesity, the more diabetes, the more sleep disorders, the more problems overall. So we really kind of live in a toxic environment where we have these high-calorie foods that are readily available. They're quite inexpensive, they're palatable, they're heavily advertised, and they're basically everywhere. And it's very hard to overcome this. If you're living on a budget and you have the choice of going to a fast food place and eating something for $2 or $3 that's seemingly satisfying, then it's hard for us as public health advocates to overcome this problem. But if we look at traditional diets, where they follow more simple diets, they have much less heart disease, they have very long life expectancy, low rates of breast, prostate, and colon cancer. It's interesting, when Elliot Jocelyn in 1922 went to Arizona, he found no diabetes in the Pima Indian population. And of course now they have 60 to 70% of their population with diabetes. It really came when surplus meat and cheese was sent to the area, and they developed a lot of fast food places around the reservations, and that led to the demise of the Pima Indians. You may know there's people who have the same exact genetic heritage who live in Mexico, who grow their own foods, eat corn, beans, vegetables, and have virtually no type 2 diabetes with essentially the same thrifty genes as the Pima Indians. So this was developed at the Harvard School of Public Health, another public health institution. The pyramid, based on 50 years of research, doing work, and seeing what really protected people from disease, by Walter Willett and his group. So certainly daily exercise is very important. Here you see people, at one time, people actually had to work to gather food, here gathering olives. Now, of course, food is just presented to us. This is high jumping. We recommend this, or whatever anybody will do to get themselves moving. But certainly finding exercises that people enjoy is important, whether it's running, biking, yoga, swimming, whatever, to try to get people so that they're doing something rather than nothing every day. This is the diabetes prevention program, where they followed people with impaired glucose tolerance and either randomized them to metformin or diet and exercising 150 minutes a week, or along with a diet that included lots of vegetables, low fat, high in fiber. During this time, they lost 15 pounds. They reduced their risk of developing overt diabetes by 58%. There's also a study in Finland that showed it was basically designed very similarly, with the exercise, with a high fiber diet, 30% of calories or less from fat, at least 30 minutes of exercise per day. And they showed similar results in terms of reducing conversion to overt diabetes. So our goal, I think, with exercise is to aim for physical fitness. Oftentimes people will come to see me and they have diabetes. Their diabetes may not be terribly poorly controlled. Sometimes I try to get them to just focus in on worrying a little bit less about their blood glucose and worrying more about becoming physically fit, because it's the best thing you can do to help prevent the high costs that are associated with diabetes in terms of the monitoring, in terms of your own personal life, the insurance costs and everything else. Exercise is a powerful tool for preventing and treating type 2 diabetes. Certainly trying, I think when it comes to diabetes, try to get people to do something every day, do a combination of both resistance exercise as well as aerobic exercise is important. having people target their 70% of their maximum heart rate, defined as heart rate 220 minus their age, and then keeping them moving. That can be very, very powerful. We also want people to try to achieve an ideal weight, to get as close as possible to ideal weight. A simple formula that you can carry around in your head in terms of ideal weight is for a woman, 5 feet is 100 pounds. Every inch in addition to 5 feet is 5 extra pounds. So if you're 5'5", ideal weight would be 125 pounds. If you're a man, 5 feet gets 106 pounds, and then 6 pounds for every inch after that. So if you were a man who was 5'10", your ideal weight, it's going to sound low, would be 166 pounds. So that's something that you can just kind of carry around in your head. You can ask somebody how tall they are, see what they weigh, and you can do a quick calculation as to how far off from their ideal weight they are, because it's such a powerful tool. We know that if you have a lower weight, you have low risk of heart attack, stroke, high blood pressure, cholesterol, and you also reduce your risk of cancer as well. We also want to promote whole grain foods. And ideally, we want to try to use foods that we recognize as something that was grown in a field somewhere. This is from Genesis. I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it, they will be yours for food. So even back, in the Bible, way back then, there was kind of a promotion of a plant-based diet. Here in the U.S., we have this idea that we have to eat so much meat, where people have a feeling like unless they have meat on their plate, that they're going to die of protein malnutrition before the next meal. But it turns out that, plants are good sources of nutrition, and we'll talk about why. So culture itself was born with the cultivation of grains, and reading of the arts lived with the storage of grain from one season to the next. So we could move from a more nomadic lifestyle to having food stored, and then being able to tell stories, to write, to do plays, to have culture itself was born from this cultivation of grains and food. This is Leonardo da Vinci, created some of the greatest work of his time. He didn't do a tremendous amount of things, but everything that he did was really the very best. And he actually ate a very healthy diet, as we'll talk about. So your body, I think, as Michelangelo points out through David, is really kind of a work of art. So try to respect it. Choose carefully what you put in your mouth, and your body will work well for you and remain kind of a work of art. So again, eat foods that are recognizable as something that was grown in a field somewhere. You see this whole grain bread, you can practically see the whole grains that are still in it. This is a good source for food. If you look at the Nurses' Health Study, this was a study of some 88,000 nurses looking at how they ate with very detailed surveys and what they did, how they did in terms of their risk of disease. The more whole grains they ate, the lower the risk of heart disease. The more whole grains they ate, the lower the risk of stroke. If they ate more whole grains, they had a 38% reduction in the risk of developing diabetes. If they ate refined grains, sugar, white flour, they had almost a 1.6-fold increased risk in developing diabetes. So the kind of grains, we walk into restaurants now and we find really the bread. There was a time it seemed where restaurants were trying to do more whole grains. It seems that's kind of gone by the wayside. I think that's kind of a tragic thing where restaurants are seemingly having a hard time, getting the whole grains out there. We also want to have a lot of vegetables in our diet. This brings us back to Hippocrates. We know that if you have 10 servings of fruits and vegetables, that you can reduce the risk of stroke and heart attack, protect from a variety of cancers, lower blood pressure. You can avoid diverticulosis and diverticulitis, guard against cataracts and macular degeneration, and also have a much more interesting plate with a lot more color and a lot more flavors as well. We know from the DASH diet, the dietary approach to stop hypertension, that eating fruits, vegetables, nuts, and fewer sweets was as effective as most blood pressure medications in terms of lowering blood pressure. And here's one of the studies actually showing a reduction in blood pressure with simple dietary intervention. So one way of looking at diet is to take kind of the extremes, and I'm going to show you 3 studies that Dean Ornish has done following a very rigid, more or less plant-based diet. The nice thing with plant-based diets is that they're low in cholesterol, they're low in saturated fats, they're high in antioxidants. They don't have a lot of oxidants, like when we think of saturated fat and fried food and stuff, which is pro-oxidant, tend to be anti-inflammatory as well, high in fiber, and high in protective plant-based substances. So one of the things that was quite dramatic in this lifestyle heart trial, that using quantitative coronary angiography, this over 5 years, showed that those people who were eating a standard diet, the SAD diet, had progression in terms of their arterial sclerosis, whereas those who were in the lifestyle trial, part of the study, actually had a reduction in stenosis of their coronary arteries. Those who follow the diet most closely had the biggest improvement in their coronary stenosis. And this is looking at PET scans, this after only 18 months, and it shows that people in the lifestyle heart trial had quite a dramatic improvement in coronary perfusion over the course of just 18 months. One thing, if you talk to a cardiologist, they'll point out that coronary disease can really progress very quickly. There's one case of a fellow in Florida who had a clean coronary cath, went on the Atkins diet for 2 years, of course, which is a lot of saturated fat and cholesterol, and in 2 years developed chest pain, had a coronary cath, and had virtually 100% stenosis of his blood vessels just over the course of 2 years. So you can see here an increase in perfusion, whereas there is a reduction in perfusion in somebody following a standard diet, where there's much more blue, there's less perfusion of the heart over the course of just 13 months. So let's look at another study that he did, this one looking at prostate cancer patients, 90 men with biopsy-proven prostate cancer, and they were randomized to comprehensive lifestyle changes. Now, this did include also some yoga and other lifestyle stress reduction techniques, but also this very rigorous vegan-type low-fat diet. And if you look at PSA, as you know, is a marker for prostate cancer. And in those people who were on the conventional diet, they had their PSA increase from 6.3 to 6.7, whereas those who had the vegan diet had their PSA drop from 6.2 down to 5.9. And those people who were in the experimental diet also had a 70% reduction in their prostate tumor size as well. Those who were most adherent had the biggest improvement in their tumor size. You can see down 72% here. I also want to point out something else that was pointed out in this study, which was looking at telomeres. Now, telomeres are on the end of your chromosomes. They're marked here in yellow. And they basically are what allow for your chromosomes to multiply, to split and create new cells. So they're kind of like a fuse of a bomb, because when they get too short, the cell can no longer divide. It becomes inactive or senescent, or it dies. And this shortening process is associated with aging, a higher risk of cancer, and a higher risk of death. So short telomeres are like a bomb fuse, and when they get too short, the cell is going to die. So, and this is telomerase, which is an enzyme that basically is at the end of these chromosomes and helps to lengthen the telomere length. And it's really a marker of aging. When you're born, you have very long telomere base pairs. You can see here 8,000 at age 0. Then at age 35, you can see that there's quite a reduction in telomere length. Age 65, all the way down to 1,500. And what he showed in this lifestyle study was an increase in telomere length. So the telomere length increased by 10%, in this case over about 18 months. And whereas in the control group, telomere length was reduced by 3%. So it seems you can actually reverse the aging process by including a diet that has a lot of plant-based foods in it. So, and also the question, I guess the question that comes up is it really being, vegan that's doing it, or is it simply including more plant-based foods, it's allowing for this virtual reversal of the aging process. Well, this is looking at people on the Mediterranean diet, and with the Mediterranean diet, you can see they also had an increase in telomere length and telomerase activity, which follows hand in hand with telomere length. So it seems like a Mediterranean diet in this case, was also helpful. But I would suspect that virtually any traditional diet, which isn't westernized, probably would be somewhat protective here. So now we'll kind of get back to the color story in some ways. And we'll talk about the blues, because this is like a story that started with blueberries. Jim Josephs, chief of the neuroscience lab at Tufts, was commuting into work with a guy named Ron Pryor. And Ron Pryor was looking at ORAC scores for different foods, oxygen radical absorbance capacity for different foods. And what Jim said was, in talking to Ron, which foods are highest in ORAC score. And Jim was from West Virginia, Ron told him that blueberries were the highest that he had, of all the fresh foods that he had tested, and Jim, being from West Virginia, said, well, I guess I'll feed my rats some of them blueberries and, see if they get better. So he started this whole cascade of work looking at the potential benefits of brightly colored fruits and vegetables in terms of protecting the brain. And this was back in about 1998 or so that they began this work. So this is, I kind of downplayed the book a little bit, but this is the book. As you see the small image of it up there, Jim Joseph, myself, and Ann Underwood, who is a writer at Newsweek. And this kind of is how the book is broken down. We have an introduction. We talk about red foods. We talk about yellow-orange foods. We talk about green foods. We talk about blue-purple foods. We have an eating plan and kind of a few statements about the truth about eating kind of thing. So it's been kind of a fun ride. It's been, when this book came out, the Produce for Better Health Foundation, the 5-a-day people, remember they were always promoting 5 fruits and vegetables per day. In our book, we're promoting more 10 servings of fruits and vegetables per day. And we kind of gave an outline on how this was possible, and sure enough, they soon adopted promoting 10 servings of fruits and vegetables. It's funny that the 5-a-day people were pushing for 10 servings of fruits and vegetables per day. It's really quite remarkable when you think about it out there. When you talk about preventing scurvy in the average American, the way the average American does it is by eating French fries, because so many Americans eat nothing that's green, nothing that's orange, nothing that's red. They don't eat any fruits and vegetables. They just get enough vitamin C from French fries to prevent scurvy. And we don't think of potatoes necessarily being such a great source of vitamin C, but it's enough to prevent scurvy. So anyway, let's get into it now. So plants are living in the sea, and here in California it's especially noticeable. If you're asked to just lie out in the sun all day, day after day, the sun would just kill you. But a plant is out there, it's rooted to the ground, and it uses these pigments to protect itself from this ultraviolet irradiation and oxidative damage. So in the last century, when we talked about nutrition, we talked about vitamins and minerals. But now it turns out that these colors in fruits and vegetables are really natural defenders that really can't be ignored. You can't take a food and strip out all the phytonutrients in it and add thiamine and biotin back to it and call it a healthy food anymore. You have to, go back to whole foods, which have, all the brightly colored fruits and vegetables. So if you want to think health, think color. So we have yellow-orange carotenoids like alpha and beta carotene, beta cryptoxanthine, lycopene, lutein, zeaxanthin, and tomatoes, for example, have very high lycopene, as you know. There is a study, a nuns health study, and what they found was that nuns who had highest levels of serum lycopene were much more likely to be able to care for themselves. The lobster there gets its red color from the lycopene that it gets in the algae in the body of the ocean. The corn has some lutein in it, and that makes it yellow. So there's a lot of different pigments out there that are, very helpful. Of course, carotenoids are also in carrots and, are the basis for vitamin A as well, but are also potent antioxidants. What's unique about tomatoes is that the lycopene is heat stable. Most of these pigments that I'm going to talk to you about today are broken down fairly quickly with heat. But turns out that when you make tomato sauce with tomatoes, the lycopene is stable, and when you put a little olive oil and spices in it, the lycopene is more readily absorbed, and it really becomes, it remains a very healthy food. And we'll compare that to blueberries later. But you also have red-blue anthocyanins, antho from the Greek meaning dark blue, cyanos meaning flower, and blueberries, strawberries, and plums have a lot of anthocyanins. I recently was up in Alaska. I thought that the Maine wild blueberry was kind of the ultimate in terms of antioxidant potential, but there is actually a study with Alaskan wild blueberries. They have a skin on them that's almost 1/16 of an inch thick. They're incredibly high in antioxidants. There was a bag of them that was melting, and what was coming out of the bag was like crude oil, just amazingly high in these pigments. And and they taste a bit more bitter, but these anthocyanins, as you'll see, are pretty amazing when it comes to protecting the body. So anthocyanins, they have almost the perfect structure for being antioxidants. They have 2 rings, a double bond, and another ring. They're partially hydrophilic, partially hydrophobic. They intercalate in cell membranes. That's where a lot of the activity takes place in terms of protecting the cell. And cells, for example, when they have more of these in there, like in older animals, they become more like the cells of young animals. Like the membranes change so that in the older animals, so that they're more like young animals. The receptors are more where they should be. The membranes become more fluid. They just basically transmit signals much better than otherwise. So plants, again, I love saying this, are living in a sea of ultraviolet light that would kill us all. Lots of free radicals being generated by all that energy. And when it comes to disease, if we think of cancer, we think of DNA damage. If we think of heart disease, it's really the oxidized LDL that starts the whole process going, activating macrophages and so on. And the best marker for predicting risk of coronary disease is C-reactive protein. And that too is, of course, very high. That's a marker of inflammation. We'll talk about Alzheimer's disease. There's some people who think that, that Alzheimer's disease is really caused by amyloid and tau proteins. What Jim and his group would say is that really what you have is a lot of oxidative damage, and the amyloid and the tau proteins are your body trying to protect itself from this oxidative process that's going on. And as you know, antibodies against amyloid have not been shown to be protective against Alzheimer's. There's probably something else, and it probably has a lot to do with this oxidative process. And then we'll come back to eye disease when we talk about lutein. So it turns out that without color, there really is no life. And it's really sad when you think about, the standard American diet and people eating so few fruits and vegetables. It's amazing that people can survive eating Pop-Tarts in the morning, French fries, and meat for lunch, and again, something highly processed without any vegetables or fruits for dinner. I mean, it's amazing people can survive on such a diet. But let's talk about red foods. So red foods are foods that should get our attention because 7 of the top 20 antioxidant fruits and vegetables are red. We have strawberries, cranberries, raspberries, cherries, red grapes, beets, red peppers. And these, if you think about a little baby, when a baby sees these foods, they're going to get excited. I mean, they look very enticing, and they should get our attention. Strawberries are thought to be a symbol of love. They are very high ORAC score. They protect from oxidative damage. They also have ellagic acid, which is a powerful anti-cancer agent as well. And if you look at the different fruits and vegetables here, if you look at fresh fruit, you can see strawberries here are pretty high. The blueberries are quite good at 2,400, blackberries, cranberries, strawberries, raspberries. And then if you look at, turns out that those vegetables that are the darkest green tend to be the highest in ORAC score as well. So kale, spinach, Brussels sprouts, alfalfa, and so on are highest in this oxygen radical absorbance capacity. This is looking at plasma ORAC score. So this is basically what they did is they took people and fed them 10 large strawberries a day over the course of 30 and 60 days and looked at how the plasma could actually quench free radicals And you can see there was quite a dramatic increase in this plasma ORAC score just by eating 10 strawberries a day. The marker for coronary disease, you want this level under 1. And in this study, they took people here with an average CRP of 2.8 and reduced CRP to less than 1 by feeding 10 strawberries a day for 30 days. People who I see have no idea how they might be able to modify their own CRP, but here's a very simple way just by using berries. We know that if you put animals in a 100% oxygen tent and they're just breathing 100% oxygen, that it creates a lot of free radicals are being generated. You can age a rat's brain from equivalent of 18 years to 60 years in just 48 hours. But if you feed these animals strawberries, you can protect the brain from functional and damage that might be seen with a microscope as well. You have similar effects with spinach and blueberries as well. Sour cherries have a reputation for being helpful for arthritis, and this is from Robert Weiss from Columbia School of Public Health. I'm an old skeptic, but within 2 days she was without pain. Her orthopedists had been talking about double knee replacement, but for now that's not in the cards. And certain foods, like you think of sour cherries and also like turmeric, as we'll talk about later, can be really potent anti-inflammatories. Sour cherries here, 10 times better than aspirin and as well as ibuprofen in blocking the enzymes that cause inflammation in vitro studies. So this frog's going to tell you it's not easy being green. This rabbit will tell you that all life really depends on green foods and vegetation. Because chlorophyll, as you know, converts CO2 and water to carbohydrates, releases oxygen to air, sustains all life. It turns out that green foods are really packed with phytonutrients. Avocado growers denied publicly and indignantly the insidious slanderous rumors that avocados were aphrodisiacs, and sales immediately mounted. So they were found avocados originally in 1519 by Hernan Cortez when he landed in Mexico. Similar butter, very good taste. They get a lot of their calories from fat, but they're 2/3 monounsaturates. And they also have beta-sinosterol, which has a structure very similar to cholesterol, competes with cholesterol for absorption in the gut, and probably has some effect in terms of reducing cancer risk. I remember talking to a dietitian in London who, with her HIV patients, really liked to use avocados and guacamole because it's so packed with nutrients and really helps these people maintain their weight, with a food that's, good tasting and easy to consume. Talking about other green foods, we have broccoli, spinach, kale, great sources of lutein and zeaxanthin. And it's related really when you have low levels of lutein in your diet, you have a much higher risk for macular degeneration. And this is really a devastating disorder. This is where older people lose their central vision because of damage to the macula through high-intensity blue light that's been interacting with that area. So people will lose their central vision. They have to depend on their peripheral vision to be able to navigate the world. It's incredibly challenging. Millions of people are affected. I should mention too that cataracts are probably partly related to oxidative damage to the lens as well. As you can imagine in the U.S., where people eat so few fruits and vegetables, in California it's maybe a little bit different, but not necessarily. But lutein intake is only about 1 milligram per day, whereas ideally it should probably be at least 6 milligrams per day. So lutein and zeaxanthin concentrate in the macula of the eye, and they do a variety of things there. They help you see blue light, but they also provide a protective component in that area of the eye, because lutein is interacting with this high energy blue light that's in the high energy wave. So this light has the potential to do significant damage to the back of the eye. If you look at AMD risk and lutein intake, you can see there's about a 60% reduction in risk of AMD in those who have 6 milligrams of lutein intake per day compared to those who have less than 1 milligram per day. So spinach is rich in the yellow-orange carotenoid lutein. It's one of the main antioxidants of the eye. It's converted to zeaxanthin. And Steve Pratt, who's down in La Jolla, who wrote the book Superfoods, I'd say partly inspired by our book, I would say, says it's one of the best things you can eat for your eye. It prevents age-related macular degeneration, which is the leading cause of blindness in elderly, by protecting that super-sensitive central region of the retina. Other things you can do for eye health are avoid tobacco, reduces macular pigment density, limit alcohol, which is an oxidative stressor, and reduces blood levels of lutein and zeaxanthin. Try to exercise regularly, wear hats and sunglasses. We know too that amber lenses can filter out blue light. And there are sunglasses that are developed that will actually block blue light. Callaway has some, but ideally when you look up at the sky with blue blocking sunglasses, you should look at the sky and it won't appear blue. Then you know that you are protected from the high energy blue light. And for people, who may be at higher risk, spend a lot of time outside, it may not be a bad thing to consider. So that brings us to blue foods now, like the blueberries, thought to be sent by the Great Spirit to preserve the Native Americans in times of scarcity. That's the starberry because it has that 5-pointed blossom. And of fresh fruits and vegetables, it's thought by some to be the undisputed antioxidant champion among fresh fruits and vegetables. And Holly McCord of Prevention says if you add one food to your diet this year, make it blueberries. What I suggest for my patients is to try to start each day with a blueberry smoothie. So that would be blueberries. I go to Mother's and get the wild Maine blueberries. I have to stop mentioning that because I'm afraid that I'll never find wild blueberries again in Mother's because everybody's eating them. But wild Maine blueberries, vanilla and sweetened almond milk. I put a pea-based protein powder in there, banana. I put cocoa beans because that's an antioxidant. You can put spices in there. A little bit of clove, just boost the antioxidant content of it as well. So it's a great way to start your day. You're kind of protecting your body from all the oxidative insults that your body's going to see that day, but with smoothies. And if you want to go a little crazy, you can even throw some spinach in there, or even crazier, throw some kale in there. Gets a little bitter. Can't do it every day, but once in a while. So the aging of the nervous system appears to involve a lifetime of insults. And like the whole aging, the reason why we age is because of oxidative damage and free radical formation. And protecting the brain is a key thing. So we have these free radicals. Your brain is basically burning through 25% of your glucose consumption continually. The Krebs cycle is going crazy, creating a lot of free radicals, and through that you get eventually some kind of brain damage. But there's a lot you can do to protect your brain. And it turns out that when it comes to blueberries, that the antioxidant power is really coming out of the blue. So some fruits have 3 or 4 different types of anthocyanins. It turns out that wild blueberries have as many as 25 to 30. It turns out that blueberries in general are good, and when we think of wild blueberries, we call them low bush blueberries. The high bush blueberries, actually they used for a lot of the studies that I'm going to show you, they are using the high bush blueberries. So this is how you measure memory in animals. So you'll take an animal and you'll have them in a room and you'll have a poster on one side and some other marker that kind of orients the animal to space on the other side of the room. And then rats don't like to swim. You put them in water. First thing they'll do is swim around the outside, try to get out. When they realize they can't get out, they know they don't want to swim, so they'll find an underwater platform. So the second time you put them in, then it's the same story. They don't want to swim. They realize they can't get out. The old animal has no memory of where that underwater platform is, so it just kind of swims around and it can't find the underwater platform. Whereas the young animal dropped in the water and boom, it remembers where that underwater platform and it goes straight to it, sits on that platform and doesn't have to be swimming anymore. So that's called the Morse water maze, and it's a way of measuring memory in older animals. So it turns out that that brightly colored fruits and vegetables, including blueberries and strawberries, were helpful in terms of helping to improve, stopping that brain decline. So the question is, can eating high antioxidant fruits and vegetables not only prevent the decline, but also reverse motor and cognitive deficits in older animals. And nothing's ever really been shown to do that, to actually be able to reverse cognitive decline. And the new analysis had shown blueberries were the highest in antioxidant of fruits and vegetables. This is motor function. This is how you measure motor function. You have a spinning rod and see how long the animal can stay on this spinning rod as it speeds up. And it turns out this is an expensive study to do because you have to take these animals, hold them for some 18 months so that they're the equivalent of between 65 and 70 years old with age-related brain deficits, and then change their diet, adding back 1% to 2% of their diet as the fruit or vegetables. And it turns out that blueberries, spinach, strawberries improve short-term memory, and only the blueberries actually reverse the deficits in coordination and balance. So these animals were able to stay on the spinning rod for 11 seconds instead of 5 seconds, which was a significant improvement. A young animal will be able to stay on for a lot longer than that, but they did show some improvement. We also think the brain is being static or even just continually declining as we age. I remember when I was young, we were told your brain does not develop new neurons. It basically, you just have neuron death, but that's not really true. And it turns out that the brains of animals fed blueberries showed reversal of receptor insensitivity. The membranes also became healthier. And they've shown that the brains of animals fed blueberries actually grew more neurons than animals not fed the high antioxidant foods. And brains also had fewer damaged proteins as well. So, and when it comes to cooking, unlike lycopene in tomatoes, cooking can be damaging to the antioxidant capacity of blueberries. The anthocyanins are susceptible to heat damage. It turns out when you bake a blueberry pie, you pretty much wipe out the antioxidant benefit of the, whereas it's somehow when you make jam and the anthocyanins get in the water, it seems like you preserve at least some of the antioxidant benefit. And again, wild, because they have more skin, just simply in terms of volume versus the skin itself, they have higher ORAC, they have more phenolics and more anthocyanins in them as well. So this is a model for Alzheimer's disease where they take animals, they have 2 defects in their genes, and they tend to develop severe plaques that are associated with Alzheimer's disease. You see the control animals here are scoring 59.4. Those are normal animals. The double transgenic defective animals are scoring 45.2. Then you take the defective animals and you feed them blueberries and they score as well as the control group. So it seems like you're protecting the animal from the defects by having the blueberries in the diet. And typically it's about 1% or 2% of their diet, probably the equivalent of about 1 cup of berries per day. What they do for this study is they take, like they have a field that's maybe 6 by 6, and they have certain objects in there, and then they change the objects in the field and see how much exploration of the new objects the animal does. And the young animals are scoring about a 65. The middle-aged animals, you see they're dropping their score down to about 45. Then you take the middle-aged animals and feed them blueberries, and you can see that their exploration increases to at least as high as the young animals. So it seems like they start to explore their environment more. So if you eat more blueberries, you might want to go on more trips, visit Greece, who knows, maybe, who knows where you'll end up. So this has also been done. There's some really smart people. There's this rocket scientist who found a way using a computer to basically test blueberries by using a computer keyboard and something that people could do at home, and showed improvements in people who had memory deficits but no dementia by feeding them blueberries. So there's a couple human studies that suggest some benefit as well. So it turns out you probably can rejuvenate the brain by eating a lot of brightly colored fruits and vegetables. Blueberries may be especially beneficial. You maybe also get benefit from combining different berries and other green things, for example, because most of these antioxidants tend to work synergistically in terms of protecting the body. I want to mention a couple other things. One is spices. It's a staple in India. There's very few dishes that are served without turmeric in them. Curcumin is the active component. It turns out that in India, less than 1% of the population actually has Alzheimer's disease. There's also evidence that you can protect from Parkinson's. It's helpful for arthritis. I had a friend who had a lot of arthritic disease adding about a teaspoon of turmeric per day. In 2 days, the inflammation, the swelling was down by just adding turmeric to the diet. It's a potent antioxidant. There's some evidence that you can reduce heart disease and stroke. In animals, they show inhibition of some 22 different types of cancer by including turmeric. So go out and have some Indian food tonight. Green tea is kind of gene therapy in a cup. I remember sitting in Jim's lab in Boston, and a guy came in from downstairs, and they have plates of 250 genes all on one plate, and then they pour different things on them and see what genes are turned on and what genes are turned off. And in turn, putting green tea on this plate is like all the genes that you wanted turned on were turned on, and all the genes that you wanted turned off were turned off. So if you do, another thing you can do is have a cup of double-strength green tea every day. There's evidence that you can protect from cancer, protect the brain, good for anxiety, reduce risk of coronary disease, and perhaps even reduce diabetes risk as well. I want to mention just a little bit on vitamin D because it's just so darn important. This is the original Boston Floating Hospital. This is where they took kids from the inner city in Boston and put them out on this ship in the summertime and let them just play out there as a way of treating rickets for older people. And now they have Boston Floating Hospital, but it's not really floating anymore. But it's part of Tufts. And I'm just going to mention a couple different diseases in vitamin D. Finland has one of the highest rates of type 1 diabetes. They have very low sun exposure for much of the year. We know, too, that places that are far from the equator have higher risk of type 1 diabetes. Studies had shown that reduced risk in babies of mothers who use cod liver oil. Cod liver oil has 400 IUs of vitamin D per teaspoon. But children in this case who received 2,000 IUs per day of vitamin D per day had an 80% reduction in the risk of developing type 1 diabetes. I mean, just a dramatic reduction in risk of developing diabetes from 2,000 IUs of vitamin D per day. In terms of strength, this looking at a couple tests here. This is looking at time to go from sitting to standing in older people. And you can see when the vitamin D levels are very low here, below 8, the time to go from sitting to standing is dramatically increased compared to those who have higher levels of vitamin D. This is looking at an 8-foot walk. Those who have very low levels of vitamin D also had a much longer time to get 8 feet, whereas those who had higher levels had an improvement as well. This is looking at breast cancer risk, again, further from the equator, less sunlight, higher risk of breast cancer, vitamin D in colon cancer, lower levels of D, higher risk of colon cancer. This is suggesting a 50% reduction in people who have vitamin D levels of 34 or higher. Breast cancer, 50% reduction in those who had levels of 52 or higher. This is looking at diabetic neuropathy, and when you think of people who have pain, vitamin D is probably playing a big role. So this is what you might expect. If you were to check vitamin D levels of people in this room who were not taking vitamin D, you probably find an average level of somewhere around 18. And then you give them 2,000 IUs per day, and you get their level up to about 30. And that's what they did in this study, 2,000 IUs per day for 3 months, levels went to 30. And what they showed, I'm sorry about the color thing here, but they basically showed a 48 or 50% reduction in pain scores in those people who were taking vitamin D 2,000 IUs per day. So it did as well as people who are on medications, like we think of Cymbalta as being the treatment, and they really are getting 50% reduction in pain. So it worked as well as pain medications for reducing pain. And other pain syndromes may be important as well. The Endocrine Society, in a group that was headed by Michael Hollick of BU, in their paper they recommend targeting levels of between 40 and 60. I'm finding for bigger people it's hard to get to those levels of between 40 and 60 unless people are taking about 5,000 IUs of vitamin D per day. This is looking at vitamin D and risk of multiple sclerosis. Right there, levels of vitamin D of 39.6, or essentially 40, had about a 62% reduction in the risk of developing multiple sclerosis. Michael Hollick has seen some patients who've had one episode of multiple sclerosis. Multiple sclerosis is one of those disorders that tends to be sporadic. It's hard to predict when people might get another episode. But he's gone ahead after one episode and put them on high levels of vitamin D, and they've never had another recurrent episode of multiple sclerosis. So something to keep in mind. Also, one thing too is like in the Middle East where women are just covered all the time, very low levels of vitamin D, it's not unusual for them to have levels of vitamin D that are undetectable or below 7. That's absolutely an epidemic, and it causes a lot of bone pain. People have flown over from the Middle East with incredible bone pain, seen at the Cleveland Clinic, check their vitamin D level, it's like undetectable. Because they have osteomalacia from vitamin D deficiency. So coming back to foods again, try to incorporate a lot of healthy proteins. You can be vegetarian, or if you do eat meat, certainly fish has been helpful, omega-3, and a good source of protein, not associated with a higher risk of coronary disease. A little wine in moderation. It turns out that the more alcohol you drink, the lower your risk of coronary disease. But when you drink more than 2 drinks per day, your risk of death from accidents outweighs the benefit of drinking the alcohol. So a little alcohol in moderation is probably reasonable. And so, our lives are really not in the lap of the gods or doctors, but really in the laps of our cooks. With black and white, we know where we stand when it comes to nutrition, but there's so many things that are changing here. I remember sitting at a doctor meeting, and this one huge doctor comes in with sits down at the table with a plate of meat, like piled this high, and sits down, and this other doctor who is very verbal kind of like looks at him and says, "Oh my God, look what he's eating." And the big guy says, "At least there's no carbs." So I think there's so many crazy ways of looking at diet, and some people think that as long as they're not eating carbs, they're eating a healthy diet, which is insane because if you're not eating carbs, or you're afraid of carrots because of the glycemic index of carrots. Actually, there's Jane Brody. I kind of put a bee in her buzz at one time when I met her, and I said, it's crazy that because the glycemic index, what they'll do there is they'll take this much carb from white bread or sugar and compare it to the equivalent amount of carrots that have the same amount of carbohydrates, so like 7 large carrots, feed them to the same person at different times and look to see how high the glucose goes in the blood. And so it turns out carrots score reasonably high when you feed them that much carrots all at once. And then people have the idea, oh my God, carrots are high in sugar, I can't eat carrots anymore. It's craziness, to eat whole foods. I mean, that's really what we need to do, and to be afraid of carrots or apples or berries because we say they have too much sugar or carbs is just pure insanity. Because plants really should be, as they said in Genesis, really should be the basis of our diets. So we want to have, a diet with fruits, vegetables, whole grains, healthy oils, to try to achieve optimal health. David Heaver of UCLA says God has done a randomized controlled trial. People who eat in this manner, exercise regularly, avoid tobacco, have the least amount of cancer, heart disease, hypertension, diabetes, and osteoporosis. So I think we're trying to offer praise here for deeply pigmented and gloriously vibrant fruits and vegetables. So this is Leonardo. He remained obstinately and resolutely himself. He was like the rock star of his day, always invited to the big parties, right? And among this sumptuous carnage where they would kill the fatted beast, the fatted calf every day, of royal cuisine, he preferred to dine on bread with fresh fruit or chickpea soup or peas cooked with almond milk or simply green salad. So he had a very simple diet, and he did some remarkable things with his life. So try to eat whole grains and healthy oils, abundant fruits and vegetables, healthy proteins, alcohol in moderation. May need to supplement vitamin D. Remember, during evolution, we were out in the sun all the time. Now we've really moved our lives indoors. It's much harder to make vitamin D. If you were a lifeguard in Australia, you might have vitamin D levels that were close to 150. Here, your level's probably closer to like 18. Some things I sometimes recommend for people, like blueberry smoothies for breakfast, salads, with chickpeas for lunch, healthy proteins and greens for dinner, and maybe even more berries at night, to really try to, maximize antioxidant protection from your fruits and vegetables. So I made it in under 1 o'clock. I'm happy to take any questions that you might have. Sure. Thanks so much. Sure.
You talked about not cooking things like blueberries, but what about frozen blueberries?
Yeah, frozen are fine, actually. The studies that I talk about are done with freeze-dried blueberries. So what they do in the studies is they freeze-dry the blueberry and then mix it in with a chow, so that the chow is about 1 or 2% blueberry, and then keep it refrigerated and then feed it to the animals that way. Yeah.
Do other fruits and vegetables hold up?
Generally, it doesn't take much heat to destroy the antioxidants. So, like for lutein, for like spinach, for example, it turns out if you just put a touch of heat on spinach, you kind of break the cell walls, and the lutein becomes more available. But too much heat, you destroy the lutein. If you put it in a smoothie, then the chopping up probably disrupts the cells to some extent, and you get the lutein that way. But other than lycopene and tomatoes, which is very heat stable, and turmeric, which seems to be somewhat heat stable as well, and maybe some of the other spices, you are generally damaging. That's why it's probably not crazy to think about like 2 meals per day where you're doing more fresh or frozen stuff, like a blueberry smoothie for breakfast, salad for lunch kind of thing, and then dinner is where you have, like another protein and, cooked kale or something like that. And that's not really that hard to do. You don't really feel like you're really giving too much up when you kind of approach your day that way. Sure.
Thank you so much. I have a bunch of questions. They all revolve around the quality of the food system itself.
Mm-hmm.
How much should we worry about things like GMOs versus organic? Should we think about seasonal food, so like blueberries in season or blueberries all year round? And how much should we be worried about levels of pesticide?
Mm-hmm. Well, Bruce Ames, who's up at Berkeley, has gone around and done talks on this. Like he came to University of Vermont one time and was talking about this. And in terms of like pesticide levels, his view is that pesticide levels are so low that it's not really a concern. There are, if you want to eat, I say to go all organic is probably too costly for most people. I think organic generally is wonderful because they tend to take better care of the soil, which is certainly an important thing. But for poor people, if it's a question of having the fruit or organic or not organic, and if they can't afford the organic, it's better for them to have it regardless. As far as GMO goes, there's a lot of speculation, but as far as I know, there's no evidence that GMO actually does damage to humans. And I really need to throw some slides in on these, because these questions come up every time I do a talk. So I need to somebody was telling me just put a slide in on these things, as far as I know, when it comes right down to it, feeding people, Monsanto produced soybeans, the idea there is that they have soybeans that are resistant to their pesticide, to the herbicide, and therefore only their vegetation will grow and the other weeds will be killed by Roundup. That's the basic idea behind the Monsanto GMO thing. But as far as I know, there's no evidence that, eating GMO foods does any damage to humans. And you can, so, I think it's a great thing to preserve the, original seeds, but I don't really know of any evidence that they really are causing damage. So was there one other thing that I forgot?
Whether we should think about the seasons and a time when we can grow everything all the time, should we still be worried about seasonal?
Well, I tell you what, I have my blueberry smoothie year round. And if you look at like wild blueberries, you can only get them fresh for about 3 weeks of the year. Otherwise, you are not getting them fresh. They will simply not be available. So, and the same is true for some other fruits and vegetables. So I won't give up my blueberry smoothies made from. I think ideally we want to try to stick to things that are closer. But I think the emphasis needs to be on just a whole variety of different. You're lucky here in California because you have so many wonderful farmers markets and everything that where you have things that were just produced that are available to you. But I would say no. I'd say frozen is fine. Frozen is actually oftentimes more economical than fresh foods oftentimes, and why not have them that way? So I would say using frozen foods is fine in my book. Sure.
Thank you so much. This was a fantastic talk. I'm wondering what you think there in the last year in different medical journals. There's been editorials calling for an end to the diet wars, an end to different diet debates, and that when we look at different diets compared to each other, the differences and outcomes are pretty marginal. And so the main argument is that as long as a patient can stick to a diet, it doesn't matter which one, they're going to be better off. I wonder what you think about that.
Yeah, well, I can understand what you're saying because there are some people who have tremendous problems with controlling their weight, and they seem to go on a low carb diet, and somehow that seems to work for them. And their weight comes down, their blood sugars get better, and they do better with that approach. But what I tell them is that it's fine for them to, if they're going to do that, they should try to incorporate at least a cup of berries and some greens every day, kind of thing. So I try to kind of keep them on the lower carb diet, but push them towards including healthy foods. So, but I'd say the low carb thing. When somebody says they're on a low carb diet, I always kind of like toss my head back and think, well, what does that mean? Does that mean that they are, they're avoiding processed food? Or does that mean they're just avoiding all carbs completely? Because to me, there's real differences between whole grain versus non-whole grain. I have a patient with diabetes, and if he eats white pastas, blood sugar goes to 275. If he eats whole wheat pastas, blood sugar goes to 175. So it seems to make quite a difference in terms of the physiology. And then you saw the Nurses' Health Study information. I'd say you can see my bias here is much more for a plant-based diet. I think in terms of the overall health of not only the people but also the planet. You can't sustain the billions of people on Earth and the ever-increasing number of people with a diet that we have in the U.S. It takes too much water, too much land. It's much more efficient to eat the plants themselves and to feed them to an animal than eat the animal, kind of thing. But I'm not necessarily promoting purely vegan type diet. But I think, that idea that we should eat more of a plant-based diet. I think we need to, just for our own self-preservation, need to consider that. Sure.
Talking about carbs, and what I hear people kind of push away would be something like white rice. And I don't know if you have studied the pigments in brown rice or the wild rice, whether they're related to the pigments you find in the fruits and berries, and if they have any kind of protective.
Well, yeah, I don't think they've been studied as much as these fruits and vegetables, but it turns out the darker rices actually do have a fair amount of anthocyanins in them, and you'd think they would have some of the similar protective benefits as that these pigments would have as well. So yeah, I would say that. So the cooked, so they may be a little bit limited there, but yeah. Sure.
exterior of the rice had the B vitamins, which is why they start promoting brown rice. And then my question is, since you graduated from Tufts, do you know Michael Greger? Dr. Michael Greger?
I think he was at Harvard. He went to Harvard Medical School, actually, I think. But I know.
Graduated from Tufts, but
Oh, maybe, but I think, really, I used to hang out at the Countway Library and just do research on vegetarian nutrition and such, but I guess I never knew him back in those days, actually, but I know who you're talking about. And and the first question was what, sorry?
The husk of the rice, the husk.
Oh, the husk. Well, I mean, berry, and this is going back a ways for me now, but, I'm sure the professor will straighten me out on this, but berry was first described when they started to polish rice and take the outside of the rice off it, and so people were just eating white rice, and then turns out they developed severe vitamin B deficiency, berry, so they got very sick, right? Am I doing so far? So then they said, well, if people are going to still keep eating white rice, we have to add some of these vitamins back. But it's not just a question of the vitamins. I mean, maybe some of the pigments, you're losing the fiber, you're losing the oils, you're losing all the other beneficial parts of the rice when you eat the white rice. So I would say plus you're regaining the B vitamins that are necessary to protect you from berry and other B vitamin deficiencies. So that's how those deficiencies were originally diagnosed, came to being by eating the processed rice. So there's a clear connection there. Okay, well, thanks so much.
Okay.